Frank Miller stood on the bridge of the EDF Defiance, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays. Earth's entire defense fleet consisted of just 12 vessels, a fact that made most of the crew nervous as reports came in of the approaching alien armada. "Sir, we've confirmed visual on the Calraxian fleet," Susan Ward said, her eyes narrowing as she studied her console. Something about the formation didn't make sense. They're arranging into attack positions, but there's something odd about their approach vector. Frank nodded without looking away from the main view screen. The Calraxian ships were massive, each one easily 20 times the size of their largest vessel. Their hulls gleamed with a metallic purple sheen that seemed to absorb light around them. "How many?" he asked quietly. 117 capital ships, sir, with what appears to be several hundred support vessels," Susan replied. She brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face, her expression serious but calm. A tense silence fell over the bridge. Earth had known about alien life for decades, but this was their first direct contact with the Calraxian Empire, a species known to dominate 3 sectors of the galaxy with brutal efficiency. "Incoming transmission, sir," called out Communications Officer Pete Dixon. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies." "On screen," Frank ordered, straightening his uniform. The view screen flickered, revealing a tall, slender alien with pale blue skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. When it spoke, its voice was deep and carried an electronic undertone. "People of Earth, I am Supreme Commander Vrax of the Calraxian Empire. Your planet is now under our protection and control. Your pathetic defense force of 12 vessels is noted and dismissed as irrelevant. Surrender immediately to avoid unnecessary destruction." George Bennett, captain of the EDF Defiance, stepped forward. "This is Captain Bennett of Earth Defense Force. We do not recognize your authority in this system. Earth is a sovereign planet, and we request you withdraw your forces immediately." The alien's upper eyes narrowed. "You misunderstand, human. This is not a negotiation. Your tiny fleet against our armada makes resistance pointless. We have conquered worlds with defenses 1,000 times more formidable than yours." Frank exchanged a quick glance with Susan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "You have 1 Earth hour to lower your planetary shields and prepare for our arrival." Vrax continued. "Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force." The transmission cut off abruptly. "They're laughing at us," muttered Ryan Cooper, weapons officer. "Literally laughing at our 12 ships." George took his command chair. "Let them laugh. Get me Admiral Carter on Luna Command." Moments later, Admiral William Carter's stern face appeared on the screen. The Luna Command Center's busy operations floor was visible behind him. "I monitored the transmission," Carter said. "Is Lieutenant Ward's analysis complete?" Susan stepped forward. "Yes, Admiral. The Calraxian formation suggests they're unaware of our actual capabilities. They're deploying as they would against conventional warships." Carter nodded slowly. "Then we proceed as planned. They see only what we want them to see. A desperate, outmatched planet with a tiny defensive fleet." "Sir," Frank interjected, "should we deploy the hammer now?" "Not yet, Commander. Let them come closer. Let them believe their own propaganda about human weakness." The Admiral's expression hardened. "Maintain defensive posture. Do not reveal capabilities until my direct order." As the communication ended, George turned to his crew. "Battle stations. All personnel to emergency protocols." Throughout the 12 Earth vessels, men and women moved with practiced precision. They appeared calm despite the overwhelming odds. Each understood what the Calraxians did not, that appearances could be deceiving. On the EDF Phantom, Olivia Powell ran final checks on systems no alien race had ever encountered. On the EDF Hammer, John Harris verified power levels that could split a moon in half. The massive Calraxian fleet approached, their weapons charging, confident in their imminent victory over humanity's tiny fleet. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first Calraxian beam struck the EDF Defiance's shields, lighting up the dark space with brilliant purple energy. Instead of collapsing, the shields absorbed the blast completely, showing only a slight flicker of blue in response. "No damage," Susan reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "Shields holding at 100%. Commander Frank watched as confusion spread across the bridge of the Calraxian flagship, visible on their still-open communication channel. Supreme Commander Vrax's four eyes blinked rapidly in what appeared to be disbelief. "Impossible," Vrax hissed. "Our scans showed primitive defensive capabilities." George allowed himself a small smile. "You scanned exactly what we wanted you to scan, Commander." Frank turned to his tactical station. "Lieutenant Ward, signal a hammer. It's time to show them what a tiny fleet can do." On the bridge of the EDF hammer, Captain Linda Wilson received the transmission and nodded to her weapons officer. "Deploy the Planet Cracker. Target their lead destroyer." The smallest ship in Earth's fleet, previously appearing dormant and powerless, suddenly came alive. Panels along its hull slid open, revealing a crystalline structure that began to pulse with intense white light. The Calraxians, still confident despite their initial surprise, focused their attacks on this seemingly vulnerable vessel. "They took the bait," Linda said calmly, initiating gravitational fold. The space around the hammer began to warp and distort. A thin beam of concentrated energy, barely visible to the naked eye, shot toward the largest Calraxian destroyer. When it made contact, nothing happened for 3 seconds. Then the destroyer imploded, collapsing in on itself as if crushed by an invisible hand. The massive ship crumpled like paper, its hull twisting and compressing until it was reduced to a dense ball of metal no larger than a small asteroid. Stunned silence fell across both fleets. "By the gods," Vrax whispered, his confidence visibly shaken. Admiral Carter's voice came through on the secure channel. "Deploy the Phantom. Execute Operation Scattered Thunder." The EDF Phantom, under Olivia Powell's command, suddenly vanished from view. Not cloaked, but completely phased out of conventional spacetime. The Calraxians frantically scanned for the missing vessel, but found nothing. "Phase jump complete," Olivia reported from somewhere beyond normal space. "We're inside their formation. They can't see or detect us." The rest of Earth's fleet began to move with precision, taking positions that seemed random to the Calraxians, but followed a carefully planned strategy. 3 more Earth ships activated their quantum displacement fields, causing them to flicker and shift, becoming almost impossible to target accurately. John Harris watched his engineering displays with satisfaction. Displacement field functioning at optimal levels. Their targeting systems can't get a lock. The Calraxians, recovering from their initial shock, launched a massive attack wave. Thousands of energy torpedoes streaked toward Earth's vessels. "Evasive pattern Delta," ordered George, his voice calm despite the incoming barrage. The Earth ships moved in perfect coordination, their maneuvers so precise they seemed to predict the Calraxian attacks before they happened. Most of the torpedoes missed completely. Those that did hit were absorbed by shields that shouldn't have been able to withstand such power. From the phased state of the Phantom, Olivia targeted the Calraxian flagship's propulsion systems. Her weapons, firing from a dimension the aliens couldn't defend against, tore through their shields as if they weren't there. On the Calraxian command ship, Admiral Zexthar turned to Supreme Commander Vrax. "This isn't possible. Their technology, it defies our understanding." Vrax stared at the view screen, watching as another of his destroyers collapsed in on itself. "We've been deceived. These aren't primitive defensive vessels." His 4 eyes narrowed in dawning comprehension. "These are weapon platforms unlike anything we've encountered." Back on the Defiance, Frank allowed himself a grim smile. Now they're beginning to understand. "Regroup. Formation pattern Vex 9. Admiral Zexthar's voice boomed across the Calraxian command channels. The remaining ships pulled back, adjusting their positions to create a more defensive arrangement. Frank watched the enemy movements carefully. "They're adapting, just as we expected." Susan nodded, Their new formation suggests they're preparing for a concentrated assault, likely targeting the hammer since they've identified it as our most powerful offensive weapon. "Signal Mary Garcia," George ordered. "It's time for Phase 2. Aboard the EDF Phantom, still phased between dimensions, Lieutenant Mary Garcia prepared her strike team. The 4 soldiers checked their phase suits one last time, technology that would allow them to maintain their shifted state even when separated from the ship. "Remember," Mary told them, "we have exactly 17 minutes before our phase sync deteriorates. Get in, plant the disruptors, get out." The small team vanished from the Phantom's airlock, moving through space in a state that made them invisible and intangible to normal matter. They headed directly for the Calraxian flagship. Meanwhile, the Calraxian fleet launched their coordinated attack. Hundreds of energy beams converged on the position of the EDF hammer. "Brace for impact," Linda shouted as her ship shuddered under the assault. Even with their advanced shielding, the concentrated firepower was overwhelming. "Shields failing," her engineer reported, "down to 23%. On the Defiance, George watched the situation unfold. "Now, Mr. Harris." John Harris, stationed at the Quantum Control Center, activated the displacement field at maximum power. 3 Earth ships, including the damaged hammer, seemed to blur and shift, becoming almost impossible to target accurately. The incoming Calraxian fire suddenly hit nothing but empty space as the ship shifted partially out of phase. "Displacement field active," John reported. "We've got 8 minutes before we need to recharge the quantum cores." Inside the Calraxian flagship, Mary and her team moved through solid walls and barriers. Calraxian crew members walked right past them, completely unaware of their presence. They reached the main power distribution hub and carefully placed their phase disruptors on critical junctions. "Charges set," Mary whispered into her comm. "Activating on my mark. Now." The devices pulsed with blue energy, momentarily phasing into normal space. Throughout the flagship, systems began to fail as the disruptors created localized phase distortions in their power network. Admiral Zexthar stared in disbelief as his command screens went dark. "What is happening?" "Unknown, Admiral," a technician responded. "Something is disrupting our power distribution. The distortion patterns don't match any known weapon signature." Back on the battlefield, the Calraxian ships hesitated as their flagship's commands became erratic. "Their coordination is breaking down," Susan reported. "Now's our chance." Frank nodded grimly. "All ships, execute pattern Sunburst." The Earth fleet moved with stunning precision, each vessel targeting specific vulnerable points on the larger Calraxian ships. The EDF Harbinger, their smallest vessel, suddenly revealed its true purpose as it activated its reality warping drive, creating localized distortions that twisted space around 3 enemy cruisers, rendering their weapons useless. Captain Bennett leaned forward in his chair. "Status on Lieutenant Garcia's team." "Returning to the Phantom now, sir," came the reply. "Mission successful." Suddenly, a massive blast rocked the Defiance. A Calraxian destroyer had broken through their defensive line. The bridge shuddered, and a support beam collapsed. "Captain," Frank shouted, diving toward George. The beam struck Captain Bennett with crushing force. Medical teams rushed to the bridge as Frank took command. "Status report," he called out, even as medics worked frantically on the fallen captain. 3 ships lost," Susan reported grimly. "The Eclipse, Valiant, and Dauntless are gone." "Lieutenant Powell," her voice caught. "Lieutenant Powell sacrificed the Dauntless to save the hammer." Frank's jaw tightened. "Signal Admiral Carter. Tell him we're down to 7 ships." Through the view screen, he watched as the Calraxians regrouped yet again, this time bringing in reinforcements from beyond the system. The battle was far from over. A tense silence fell across space as both fleets pulled back, assessing the damage. The EDF Defiance's medical bay was crowded with wounded personnel. Frank stood by Captain Bennett's bed, where medical staff worked to stabilize his condition. "Will he make it?" Frank asked the ship's doctor. "He's stable for now, but those injuries are severe. He needs more advanced treatment than I can provide here." Frank nodded grimly and returned to the bridge, where Susan was analyzing data from the battle. "The Coraxians have pulled back to the edge of the system," she reported. "They're regrouping, but they've also opened a communication channel." "Put it through," Frank ordered, settling into the captain's chair. The view screen flickered to show Admiral Zexthar. The Coraxian's blue skin appeared paler than before, and one of his 4 eyes was covered with a healing patch. "Human vessels," he began, his voice less confident than during their first encounter. "Your resistance has been unexpected. We propose a temporary ceasefire to discuss terms." Frank exchanged glances with Susan before responding. "This is Commander Miller of Earth Defense Force. We agree to a ceasefire. Stand by for further communication." After the channel closed, Frank opened a secure line to Lunar Command. "Admiral Carter, the Coraxians are requesting talks." "Good," Carter responded. "We're sending Ambassador Laura White to your location. She'll handle the diplomatic approach." Within an hour, Ambassador White arrived on the Defiance. Her diplomatic shuttle docked as the crew prepared the conference room. "Commander Miller," she greeted him with a firm handshake. "I've been briefed on the situation. How many ships have we lost?" "3, Mom. And nearly 200 crew members." Laura's expression remained composed, but her eyes revealed her grief. "Let's make sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain." Meanwhile, in engineering, John Harris made a discovery. He called Susan down to his station, pointing excitedly at his display. "Look at this," he said. "I've been analyzing the Coraxian shield frequencies. There's a fluctuation pattern that repeats every 3.7 seconds. If we time our weapons to hit at precisely the right moment." Susan studied the data. "We could bypass their shields entirely." "John, this is brilliant." John grinned. "I thought you might like it." On the bridge, Communications Officer Pete Dixon received a transmission from the EDF Harbinger. "Commander, Captain Daniel Green reports his reality warping drive is fully recharged. The Harbinger is ready for deployment." Frank nodded. "Keep them on standby. I have a feeling we'll need them soon." In the conference room, Ambassador White faced the Coraxian delegation across a long table. Admiral Zexthar led the alien group, flanked by several military advisors. "Your resistance has been impressive," Zexthar admitted. "Perhaps we underestimated your species." Laura smiled diplomatically. "The human race prefers peace. Admiral, this conflict could end today if you simply leave our system and recognize our sovereignty." The Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. "Your technology is remarkable, but let's be realistic. You've lost 3 ships. We've lost 12. We have thousands more at our disposal." "Numbers aren't everything," Laura replied calmly. "Indeed," Zexthar said coldly, "but they do matter." As the diplomatic talks continued, Susan worked with John to develop a tactical plan exploiting the shield weakness. They'd brought their findings to Frank. "If this works," Susan explained, "we could disable their ships without destroying them. It might save lives on both sides." Frank studied the proposal. "Get this to Ambassador White. It might strengthen our position." Back in the conference room, a Coraxian aide whispered something to Admiral Zexthar. The Admiral's expression darkened. "It seems our reinforcements have arrived," he announced, rising from his seat. "This discussion is over. You have one final chance to surrender." Laura remained seated. "I'm afraid we can't do that, Admiral." "Then your species has chosen extinction," Zexthar declared before storming out with his delegation. Frank's voice came through on Laura's communicator. "Ambassador, we're detecting over 200 new Coraxian ships entering the system." Laura closed her eyes briefly. "Understood, Commander. It seems diplomacy has failed. Activate the Harbinger." Frank stood on the bridge of the EDF Defiance, watching as the massive Coraxian reinforcements joined their main fleet. The tactical display showed over 300 enemy vessels now, arranged in attack formation. All ships, battle stations, he ordered. This is going to be their full assault. The 7 remaining Earth vessels moved into defensive positions. The EDF Harbinger, smallest of them all, took position at the center of their formation. Harbinger reports ready, Commander, Susan said. Captain Green requests permission to activate the reality warping drive. Frank nodded grimly. Tell him to proceed, and inform all ships to implement Lieutenant Ward's shield penetration strategy. Aboard the Harbinger, Captain Daniel Green sat in his command chair, hands steady as he entered the activation codes. Reality warping drive powering up, his engineer reported, reaching critical threshold in 5 seconds. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. May God help us all. Activate the drive. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, space itself began to distort around the tiny vessel. Light bent in impossible ways, creating rippling patterns that spread outward like waves on a pond. As the effect reached the approaching Calraxian ships, they began to slow, their movements becoming sluggish. It's working, Susan whispered, watching the tactical display. The localized space-time distortion is affecting their propulsion systems. The Calraxians, confused by this new weapon, concentrated their fire on the Harbinger. Energy beams and torpedoes streaked toward the small ship, but most missed as they passed through the warped space around it. Now, Frank ordered, all ships, execute Plan Ward. The Earth vessels fired in perfect synchronization, timing their weapons to hit the Calraxian shields at the exact moment of vulnerability John had discovered. Beams of concentrated energy sliced through the supposedly impenetrable defenses, striking critical systems. 12 Calraxian cruisers went dark immediately. Another 15 began drifting, their propulsion systems disabled. Admiral Zexvar's voice boomed across all channels. Focus all fire on that small vessel. It is the source of the distortion. The remaining Calraxian ships adjusted their approach, concentrating overwhelming firepower on the Harbinger. Captain Green's voice came through, steady despite the situation. Shields failing. We can't maintain the reality warping field much longer. Frank turned to Susan. We need to buy them time. Lieutenant Ward, signal the Phoenix and Valkyrie to move to intercept positions. The 2 Earth ships broke formation, placing themselves between the Calraxian fleet and the Harbinger. They took the brunt of the alien assault, their shields flaring brightly under the barrage. Phoenix reporting critical damage. Came the desperate call. We can't hold them much longer. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. The Phoenix had sacrificed itself, detonating its quantum core to create a momentary gap in the Calraxian line. Admiral Carter is on the secure channel, Pete announced. Put him through, Frank ordered. The Admiral's face appeared on screen, his expression grave. Commander Miller, you've done all you can with conventional tactics. I'm authorizing the use of the Nemesis Protocol. A hush fell over the bridge. Everyone knew what that meant. Understood, Admiral, Frank replied. Sending the authorization code now. At the edge of the battlefield, the EDF Nemesis had remained hidden behind Earth's moon, its presence unknown to the Calraxians. Now it moved into position, its unique hull configuration revealing itself as it powered up its main weapon. Gravitational singularity generator at full power, reported the Nemesis commander. Targeting the center of the Calraxian formation. A small dark sphere formed at the front of the Nemesis. It hung there for a moment, seemingly harmless, before shooting toward the heart of the enemy fleet. When it reached its target, the sphere expanded rapidly. Space folded inward around it, creating a localized gravitational singularity. 27 Calraxian ships were caught in its pull, crushed beyond recognition as they were drawn inexorably toward the center. Within minutes, more than half the Calraxian fleet had been destroyed or disabled. They're retreating, Susan announced, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. The remaining Calraxian vessels broke formation, pulling away from Earth at maximum speed. Frank watched them go, his expression solemn. They'll be back. And next time, they'll bring their entire armada. The Calraxian ships fled to the outer reaches of the solar system, regrouping near the orbit of Neptune. Frank ordered a full damage assessment of Earth's remaining fleet. The news wasn't good. "We're down to 5 functional ships," Susan reported, her voice tight with exhaustion. "The Harbinger's reality warping drive is completely burned out. The Hammer can still fight, but its main weapon is offline." Frank nodded grimly. "What about Captain Bennett?" "Stable, but still unconscious," she replied. "Medical says he should recover, given time." Frank turned to the communication station. "Any word from the Calraxians?" Pete shook his head. "Nothing official, sir, but I've been monitoring their transmissions. They're speaking in code, but I'm picking up repeated references to something called the Grand Armada." Susan looked up sharply. "Let me see that." She moved to Pete's station, studying the intercepted communications. Her expression grew increasingly concerned. "Sir, if I'm translating this correctly, they've called for their entire fleet. Not just reinforcements, everything they have." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. "How many ships are we talking about?" Frank finally asked. Susan swallowed hard. "Based on intelligence estimates, at least 3,000 vessels." John Harris, who had come to the bridge to report on repair progress, let out a low whistle. "Well, we're done for." Frank stood up straight. "No, we're not. Get me Admiral Carter." When the Admiral's face appeared on screen, Frank explained the situation without preamble. "They're bringing everything they have, sir. Our current force can't possibly stand against them." Carter's face remained impassive. "I understand, Commander. It seems we've reached the threshold we discussed." He turned to someone off-screen. "Initiate Protocol Omega. Authorization Carter 07 Alpha." Frank felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "So we're really doing this?" "Yes, Commander. It's time to show the Calraxians what they're really up against." Carter's expression softened slightly. "You and your crew have done exactly what was asked of you. You've convinced them that our tiny fleet is all we have." Susan looked between Frank and the Admiral, confusion evident on her face. "Sir, I don't understand." Frank turned to her with a slight smile. "Lieutenant Ward, what you've seen so far, our 12 ships, our advanced technology, it was never our actual defense force. It was bait." "Bait," she repeated. "A demonstration," Frank explained. "Enough to make the Calraxians commit their full military might to this system." On the view screen, Admiral Carter nodded. "Commander Miller, bring your ships home. It's time for Phase 3. As the remaining Earth vessels limped back toward their home planet, Susan continued to press for answers. "Sir, with all due respect, 5 damaged ships can't possibly." "Lieutenant," Frank interrupted gently, "look outside." Susan turned to the view screen, which showed the space around Earth. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then, one by one, small lights began to appear. Hundreds of them. Thousands. "What am I looking at?" she whispered. John stepped closer to the screen, his eyes wide. "Those are ships. Automated drone vessels. Thousands of them. All around the solar system, hidden installations came to life. Asteroid bases that had appeared to be simple mining operations revealed massive hangar doors. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn opened concealed launch bays. Even Earth's oceans parted as underwater facilities released swarms of defensive vessels. 10,000 automated warships," Frank said quietly, "each one carrying the same technology as our tiny fleet, but requiring no crew. This was always the plan." On the command ship of the retreating Calraxian forces, Admiral Zexthar stared in disbelief at the sensor readings. "This cannot be right," he growled. "Scan again." His sensor officer worked frantically at his station. "The readings are accurate, Admiral. We're detecting thousands of new vessels activating throughout the system. Their energy signatures match the technology we encountered earlier." Zexthar sank into his command chair. "They tricked us," he murmured. "The humans wanted us to call our Grand Armada." They wanted us to commit everything. The tactical officer turned from his station. Admiral, there's more. The humans are activating some kind of energy grid between their planets. Throughout the solar system, massive energy conduits sprang to life, connecting the planets in a vast web of defensive power. John Harris, watching from the Defiance, allowed himself a smile of pure satisfaction. The Calraxian Grand Armada arrived with devastating force. 3,000 warships materializing from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Their massive vessels stretched as far as the eye could see, blocking out the distant stars like an artificial eclipse. Admiral Zex Thar stood on his new flagship, having abandoned his damaged command vessel. His 4 eyes scanned the tactical displays showing Earth's defenses. "Status report," he demanded. "The humans have deployed approximately 10,000 automated vessels," his tactical officer reported. "They've also activated some form of energy grid connecting their planets." Zexthar hissed in frustration. "How did we miss this? Our intelligence indicated 12 ships." 12. On Earth, the United Space Command Headquarters buzzed with activity. Admiral Carter stood at the center of operations, surveying the massive holographic display of the solar system. Frank Miller and Susan Ward had been transported from the Defiance to assist with coordinating the defense. "The Calraxian fleet has arrived," an operator announced. 3,000 vessels, as expected. Carter nodded calmly. "Open a system-wide channel." Ambassador Laura White stepped forward, her expression resolute. "This is Ambassador Laura White of Earth. Attention Calraxian forces. You have entered sovereign human space against our explicit warnings. We now offer you one chance to surrender unconditionally and withdraw from our system." Admiral Zexthar laughed when he received the transmission. "They still believe they can dictate terms. Launch all fighters. Begin the assault." The Calraxian armada surged forward, thousands of smaller attack craft pouring from the larger vessels. Carter watched impassively as they approached. "They've made their choice. Activate primary defense protocols." Frank turned to Susan. "Lieutenant Ward, you have tactical command of defense grid sectors 1 through 5. Susan nodded and moved to her station, fingers flying across the controls. Around Earth, thousands of automated defense ships moved into perfect formation, creating layers of defensive screens. The Calraxian fighters hit the first layer of Earth's defenses. To their shock, the automated vessels responded with precision that seemed impossible, predicting their every move. Hundreds of Calraxian fighters were destroyed in the first exchange. "What is happening?" Zexthar demanded as reports of massive losses poured in. "The automated vessels appear to be using advanced predictive algorithms," his science officer reported. "They're anticipating our attack patterns before we execute them." On Earth, John Harris monitored the solar defense grid. "Grid at full power, Admiral. Ready on your command." Carter gave a single nod. "Activate." The web of energy connecting the planets suddenly blazed with blinding light. Any Calraxian vessel that crossed the grid lines was instantly vaporized, cut in half by beams of energy hot enough to rival the sun. Zexthar watched in horror as a third of his fleet was destroyed in minutes. "Pull back. Regroup beyond the energy grid." But even as the Calraxian ships retreated, Earth's automated fleet advanced, pushing outward from their defensive positions. Each drone ship targeted specific weaknesses in the Calraxian vessels, exploiting the shield vulnerability that John had discovered. "We're losing ships too quickly," Zexthar's second-in-command reported. "At this rate, the entire armada will be destroyed within the hour." For the first time in the 3,000-year history of the Calraxian Empire, Admiral Zexthar considered the unthinkable. "Open a channel to the humans." Ambassador White received the transmission with Carter, Frank, and Susan at her side. "This is Admiral Zexthar of the Calraxian Empire." His voice wavered slightly. "We request terms for cessation of hostilities." The room fell silent. Laura stepped forward. "We accept your surrender, Admiral. All Calraxian vessels will power down weapons and shields immediately. You will withdraw from our system under escort." and you will acknowledge Earth and all human colonies as sovereign territory, never to be threatened again." There was a long pause before Zexthar replied, "Agreed." One by one, the Calraxian ships powered down their weapons. The Great Armada, once the terror of 3 galactic sectors, now floated helplessly amid the wreckage of their own fleet. Captain George Bennett, recovered enough to stand with assistance, joined Frank on the observation deck overlooking Earth. "So the deception worked," Bennett said quietly. Frank nodded. "Perfectly. They never suspected that our tiny fleet was just the visible tip of our true defense force." 5 years had passed since the Calraxian surrender. Earth had transformed from an isolated world to the center of a growing alliance of species. The planet, once mocked for its tiny fleet, now stood as a respected power in galactic politics. Captain Susan Ward sat in her ready room aboard the EDF Vindicator. The ship's mission of peaceful exploration had taken her to 17 different star systems. Today, they orbited Proxima Centauri, Earth's nearest stellar neighbor and home to humanity's first extrasolar colony. A chime announced a visitor. "Enter," Susan called. Frank Miller, now Admiral Miller, stepped through the door. His hair had more gray than before, but his posture remained straight and proud. "Admiral," Susan greeted him, standing. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow's ceremony." Frank smiled. "I came early. Wanted to see how my favorite captain was doing." They moved to the viewport, watching as ships from a dozen different species moved through the busy space lanes around the colony. "Look at them all," Susan said softly. Calraxians trading peacefully with Zentari. Humans and Drell working together on that space station. 5 years ago, none of this seemed possible. Frank nodded. The defeat of the Calraxian Empire changed everything. The galaxy was ready for something different. On the colony below, final preparations were underway for the first Galactic Council Summit to be held in human space. Representatives from 27 species would attend, including former Admiral Zexthar, now serving as the Calraxian diplomatic envoy. "Have you spoken with George lately?" Susan asked. "Captain Bennett is doing well," Frank replied. "His new position as Earth's defense minister keeps him busy, but he seems happy. The injuries still bother him on cold days." Susan's communication device chirped. She checked the message and smiled. "John Harris has arrived. Apparently, his new gravity manipulation technology is causing quite a stir among the visiting scientists." Frank laughed. "That man never stops inventing. I heard the Drell offered him his weight in precious metals for the technology." "He turned them down," Susan said. "Said he'd rather share it freely at the summit." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the bridge. "Captain, we're detecting an unidentified vessel approaching the system. It's not matching any known configuration." Susan and Frank hurried to the bridge. The main view screen showed a strange ship unlike anything they had seen before. It was crystalline in structure, with no visible propulsion system. "Hail them," Susan ordered. After several attempts, the alien vessel responded. A being of pure energy appeared on screen, its form constantly shifting and flowing. "Greetings, humans." It spoke, its voice resonating in their minds rather than through the speakers. "We are the Luminary. We have observed your victory over the Calraxians and your subsequent actions. You did not conquer. You did not enslave. This is unexpected." Frank stepped forward. "We believe in cooperation rather than domination. What brings you to our system?" "We have existed at the edges of this galaxy for millennia, watching civilizations rise and fall. The Calraxians were but one of many empires that chose the path of conquest. You are the first to defeat such an empire, and then extend a hand in peace." Susan exchanged glances with Frank before responding. "Would you like to join our Galactic Council Summit? All species are welcome." The energy being seemed to pulse brighter. "This is why we have come, to offer you knowledge. The galaxy faces threats you cannot yet comprehend. Your strategy against the Calraxians, appearing weak while hiding your true strength, has served you well. but greater challenges await. Frank's expression grew serious. What kind of threats? Beyond the borders of this galaxy, ancient forces stir. We will speak more at your summit. As the transmission ended, Susan and Frank stood in silence, contemplating the luminary's warning. When we defeated the Colraxians, Susan finally said, "I thought we had secured our place in the galaxy." Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. "It seems the story of humanity's rise is just beginning." Below them, the lights of the human colony shone brightly against the alien landscape, a beacon of what humanity had achieved, and a reminder of how far they still had to go.